Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for a video which will take place in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one, obviously, being the poetry discussion playlist, now over 300 poems strong, and second, the poem by poem read along of the collected poems by Sylvia Plath. This is part 22 of that 274 part series. The poem in question today is known as The Glutton, and there will be a couple of different things going on in this video. I have a poem from Charles Bukowski to compare this poem to, as well as a painting from Francisco Goya. Francisco de Goya. The the theme of this video might well be captured best by the philosophy of Stoicism. Let's get into it. The glutton, he, hunger strung, hard to slake, so fitted is for my black luck, with heat such as no man could have, and yet keep kind, that all merits in being meat, seasoned how he'd most approve. Blood's broth filched by his hand, choice wassail makes, cooked hot, cupped quick to mouth, though prime parts cram each rich meal. He'll not spare nor scant his want until sacked larders gone bone bare. Now, I want to compare this poem, and not really compare, I guess, sort of build on this poem with Charles Bukowski, possibly the least likely of mashups there ever was, in a poem titled Retired. This is what Bukowski had to say. "Pork chops," said my father. "I love pork chops." And I watched him slide the grease into his mouth. "Pancakes," he said, "pancakes with syrup, butter, and bacon." I watched his lips heavy wetted with all that. "Coffee," he said. "I like coffee so hot it burns my throat." Sometimes it was too hot, and he spit it out across the table. "Mashed potatoes and gravy," he said. "I love mashed potatoes and gravy." He jowled that in, his cheeks puffed as if he had the mumps. "Chili and beans," he said. "I love chili and beans." And he gulped it down and farted for hours, loudly grinning after each fart. "Strawberry shortcake," he said, "with vanilla ice cream. That's the way to end a meal." He always talked about retirement, about what he was going to do when he retired. When he wasn't talking about food, he talked on and on about retirement. He never made it to retirement. He died one day while standing at the sink filling a glass of water. He straightened out like he'd been shot. The glass fell from his hands, and he dropped backwards, landing flat, his necktie slipping to the left. Afterwards, people said they couldn't believe it. He looked great. Distinguished white sideburns, pack of smokes in his shirt pocket, always cracking jokes, maybe a little loud and maybe with a bit of a bad temper, but all in all, a seemingly sound individual, never missing a day of work. Now, those two poems, might seem to stand in contrast, might seem one is a sort of a funny, joking poem, one is a poem about the subject of which is sort of lurking and predatory. I contend that they are closer than not, and when I read the Sylvia Plath poem, the Bukowski poem came to mind immediately. And upon those two, one of the most chilling, one of the most haunting paintings you will ever see came to mind as well. And when it did, I think I was a bit misled by my own intuitions, by my own critical intuitions, by the direction in which I thought I was going to take this. This painting here, Saturn Devours His Children, Francisco de Goya. Saturn, the story of Saturn is that I believe there was a prophecy that one of his children would usurp him and kill him. And there is the subsequent story that what happened was, as his wife would give birth, he would just eat his children. He would become the devouring father. My initial thought process here was to wonder about what this says about men. We love a man who has his stuff together and who is disciplined. Both of these poems and this painting scream of men who are not disciplined. That's the original place I wanted to take this, just, sort of drafting out the thoughts that I was going to go through in this video. However, I don't think it's men. I think I have stumbled across examples where men are called into question. It is a man in the Sylvia Plath poem. It is a father in the Bukowski poem. And it is Saturn, the father, the warlord, in the Goya painting. He, hunger-strung and hard to slake. I think these sentiments are true regardless of gender. I don't think that lack of discipline is necessarily something that we reward in anyone. There are certain so for example, I think it's the Robert Greene's The Laws of Seduction. Is that what the one on seduction is called? He outlines a couple of different personality types, one of which being the rake, where discipline is not necessary, and the dandy, where discipline is not necessarily really prized. And certainly there are characters, the dude, that we understand do not have discipline. But it's really anyone that is undisciplined is someone that we feel we cannot trust. This idea of the glutton. Is there a difference between being ravenous and being undisciplined? There is a reason why something like Stoicism has lived so long, I believe, because it's extremely effective to whatever it is that's going on between our ears. The idea of discipline, the idea of keeping things in a straight course, the idea of moderation, the idea of not being a glutton, of not being ravenous, is something that we find is only beneficial. Now, at the same time, we feel, I think on many levels, as if it is something that rips a little bit of the humanity out of us. The idea of romance, not necessarily romantic romance, but not necessarily the idea of love romance, but romantic in the way that we are able to let our whims take us. That type of romance. Being romantic in the fact that, you know what? We're going to go out to dinner tonight. You know what? I feel like dancing. That type of romance is that type of being romantic, that type of idealism, that type of spontaneity is seen as that which adds to our human experience, adds to our humanity. What a waste it is to be boring, right? People try to break out of their boring lifestyles, right? People will leave their significant other if things are too boring. But I think we are misled a little bit by the temptation of the romantic, by the temptation of spontaneity, because the temptation of spontaneity suggests that there is some norm from which we might break. The idea of the glutton here is that this poem is all this guy ever is. He is gluttonous. The idea in Retired was that the father figure's personality was completely consumed by consummation. He loved to eat. In the Goya painting, go back down to it here. In the Goya painting, the idea of discipline here is that the father would not be able to employ the discipline necessary to raise children that would respect him. So one of them would usurp his powers. One of them would kill him. So he ate them. Is there something in human life that we thrive on 80% discipline, 20% spontaneity? Something like that. Is there a magic number? Because otherwise, we would, if we flipped it, where we are 80% spontaneity, again, at that point, it's not spontaneity, it's just unpredictability. If we flipped it to we were 80% spontaneity, 80% unpredictability, 20% cracking the whip, because that is how the discipline comes into play when you let it go so far. It is cracking the whip. It is not the discipline of, it is the discipline, I guess, ironically, of an angry father. Not the discipline necessary to wake up on time, get to work on time, brush your teeth in the morning, brush your teeth at night. It is not that type of discipline. It is discipline the way that children think of discipline. It is discipline in the way that is punishment, not discipline in the way that says, you're good enough to do this, you're good enough for this, you can get this done. Discipline in that sense, discipline in the way that we have to instill it on a daily basis, that's the 80%. If we do not have that 80% down pat, probably things spiral out of control. But if there is a magic number, we'll say 80% for the sake of argument, and we go too far the other way, so 80% unpredictability, 20% crack in the whip, what if we went up to 85% predictability? What if we went up to 89%, 92% predictability? At that point, perhaps the mechanism in us that needs romance breaks. What if it does? And then the little bit of spontaneity of life would feel itself like punishment. I've often wondered, I've lived alone for a very long time, and I'm firmly of the belief that at some point, living on your own makes you a little bit weirder. And living alone for a second year makes you a little bit weirder than that. And so on and so forth. What if one day it turns out you're just the guy who's yelling at his underwear in the laundromat, and you never saw yourself getting to that point? Because the crazy guy never knows he's crazy, right? What if that's the case when spontaneity becomes too little a part of life? I'm not sure really how we got here from there, but that's all I have for this poetry discussion, the 22nd in a 274-part series, journeying poem by poem through the collected poems by Sylvia Plath. This video will be in two separate playlists, the Sylvia Plath read-along, as well as the poetry discussion playlist. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do on this channel, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, there's poetry on the channel every Monday. There are many other things going on the channel right now. We've just finished up Dubliners by James Joyce. We are going short story by short story through the Fincavigia edition by Ernest Hemingway, all of Ernest Hemingway's short stories. And there's always new stuff coming. If you have an idea of what short story collection you want me to read next, let me know. And I hope to have you back for the next video.